The sun was a mere, exhausted whisper, draining its final colors into the small, square window pane of Sarah's traditional home, painting the motes of ancient dust that danced in the air with a fleeting, nostalgic gold. This delicate, transient light, known to her heart as the magic hour, always summoned the ghosts of memory, making the air thick with scents of old books, the lingering sweetness of yesterday's tea, and the wood smoke that clung stubbornly to the cotton fibers of her shawl. Sarah, 72 years young but burdened by the weight of every single year lived with effort, sat upon her favorite high-backed chair, the deep cushions now perfectly molded to the shape of her weariness. Her hands, resting inertly in her lap, were the true chronicles of her life, mapped with the precise, raised relief of hardship. The veins like blue rivers on dry land, the skin cross-hatched with the fine, deep lines of worry and weather, and the faint, pale scars near her wrist, the lasting signatures of factory work and domestic toil. She ran a thumb, rough as old bark, over the smooth, cooler surface of a simple wooden bead she kept tucked into her palm, a habit of contemplation. At her knee, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her skirt, sat Liam, her grandson, a bright, curious vessel of 8 years, whose eyes, wide and clear as the sky before rain, absorbed every minute change in the landscape of her face. He was tracing the woven pattern of the floor rug, his concentration intense, yet periodically he would look up, sensing the shift in her atmosphere, the silent retreat into the past that always claimed her around this hour. "Grandma," he finally whispered, the sound small and tentative in the large silence of the room. "You are gone again. You look like you are watching a play that no one else can see." His small hand lifted, reaching out tentatively, and then settled gently, resting atop her own knotted, resilient hand, a gesture of pure, instinctual love that always anchored her to the present. Sarah sighed then, a sound that was less breath and more the quiet settling of stones, a mixture of deep, weary peace and an enduring, persistent ache. "Not a play, my heart," she answered, her voice a low, textured hum, resonant with years of stories and lessons, but a history. This light, it doesn't just show the dust, it reveals the past. And today, I am seeing the beginnings of a story I have never told anyone, not even your mother. It is a story about a great fortune, a great test, and a decision that was harder than losing everything. She paused, her eyes glazing over momentarily as she gathered the fractured fragments of her decades. Liam waited, patient and alert, recognizing the gravity of the shift. He slid closer, leaning his cheek against her knee, ready to absorb the immense weight of her confession. Sarah began her journey back, describing the early, sun-drenched, yet threadbare years of her marriage to John, a man whose kindness was as boundless as their financial deficits. She painted the cinematic scene of their tiny, leaky, rented dwelling in the 1970s, where their fierce, consuming love was their only shield against the constant, gnawing anxiety of poverty. She detailed the specific, visceral struggle, the relentless, metallic taste of fear when the landlord knocked, the painful ritual of dividing one small loaf of bread to last 3 days, the way they would hold each other tight in the dark, their whispered dreams of a better life for their future daughter, Rhea, the only currency of hope they possessed. John, in her memory, was always in motion, always seeking, always sacrificing, working himself down to the bone in factories and fields, fueled only by the singular, burning promise they had made to one another, that Rhea would live like a princess, untouched by the grinding, dehumanizing pressures of want. This promise, born of beautiful intention, would ironically become the central burden of Sarah's later life, the shield she built for Rhea proving far too thick for the girl's own good, preventing her from ever developing the necessary callus of resilience that Sarah herself had inherited from the cold, cruel hands of survival. Sarah's internal monologue here was long and agonizing, a philosophical justification for her youthful idealism, detailing how the lack of money wasn't just a material absence, but a constant, debilitating psychological stress that she was determined to spare her child from experiencing even a single day of. She meticulously described the small, almost imperceptible lies she began to tell Rhea, even as a toddler, claiming a simple dress was a gift when it was bought with months of scrimped change, inventing rich benefactors for small toys, all to maintain the illusion of absolute security and comfort, unwittingly sowing the first, almost invisible seeds of entitlement deep within her daughter's heart. The atmosphere in the room tightened as Sarah's narrative shifted, her voice dropping to a near whisper that resonated with a palpable 20-year-old pain. She described the sudden, brutal rupture in her life, the day John died in an industrial accident, a meaningless, quick tragedy that left her with a crushing silence instead of a partner. She spent a long passage detailing the sheer sensory horror of that day, the sterile, metallic smell of the hospital corridors, the flat, formal language of the police officer, and the way her mind immediately, clinically shut down the process of grief. Her internal monologue during the funeral was lengthy and agonizing, describing her own physical paralysis. She couldn't afford to cry, she argued silently, not while she needed to calculate the meager insurance payout, the surviving pension, and the exact cost of keeping Rhea, then a fragile, devastated teenager in school. Grief, to Sarah, was a profound, expensive luxury, and she was, first and foremost, a survivor and a mother. This relentless focusing on survival led her to intensify the shield around Rhea. She became both mother and father, protector and sole provider, doubling down on the lie that everything was fine, refusing to let Rhea see the depths of the financial abyss they had skirted. This overprotection, however, resulted in a young woman, Rhea, who was deeply loving and kind, yet utterly naive and unprepared for the inherent difficulties of the adult world, viewing any hardship as a personal affront or failure. The narrative propelled forward 2 decades, landing Sarah, now elderly and alone in her modest house, at the moment of the shattering, unexpected call. The solicitor's voice, dry and professional over the cheap telephone line, delivered the news of her estranged uncle's death and the unimaginable, astronomical figure of the inheritance: $7 million. Sarah spent a detailed, clinical paragraph describing her physical reaction, the immediate, nauseous dread, the rapid, shallow breaths that failed to fill her lungs, the sight of her own trembling hand gripping the receiver. She was not elated. She was terrified. Her internal monologue here was a torrent of fear. $7 million was not salvation. It was a deadly, potent poison. She immediately ran through the possible scenarios. Rhea, naive and trusting, would be preyed upon. Arjun, the man she knew Rhea was seeing, would treat her as a source of endless supply. The community, seeing sudden wealth, would turn envious and cold. The sum of money, in her hands, was a profound moral trap, a responsibility heavier than any poverty she had ever known. This deep-seated fear solidified her resolution. The money would be a complete secret, a silent sentinel in a distant bank. This decision was instantly tested by the news of Rhea's engagement to Arjun. Sarah's cinematic observation of Arjun during their engagement dinner was highly focused, detailing the minute signs of his avarice, the subtle way his eyes lingered on the expensive wine list, the excessive volume of his boasts, and the quick, practiced dismissal of anything that wasn't branded or extravagant. The subsequent discussion about the wedding budget was drawn out into a lengthy, tense dialogue where Rhea, fueled by her lifelong belief in the royal treatment, passionately argued for a destination wedding in Paris, complete with luxury details. Sarah sat like a stone, the secret weight of $7 million pressing down on her spine, forcing her to utter the agonizing, self-inflicted lie. She told them she could only offer her meager life savings, the calculated, insulting figure of $15,000. She watched, heartbroken but resolute, as Arjun's face froze in blatant disgust and Ria's eyes filled with disappointed, angry tears. This was the moment of her self-sacrifice. She was choosing to bear the pain of her daughter's momentary hatred, the appearance of cruelty, over the long-term, devastating risk of funding their materialism. It was a choice born of profound love, but executed with cold, almost clinical detachment, solidifying the protective veil of deception around her wealth. The period immediately following Sarah's meager donation of $15,000 was the most agonizing part of her self-imposed test, a stretch of weeks that she recounted with the precise, sharp memory of a wound that had healed but left a painful scar. The silence from her daughter was crushing, a deliberate, passive-aggressive withdrawal that spoke volumes of Ria's disappointment and perceived betrayal. Sarah detailed the experience of answering Ria's infrequent, clipped phone calls, the subtext of "poor mother" hanging unspoken in the air, a source of constant, dull ache that Sarah had to absorb daily. Her internal monologue during this Cold War phase was a detailed examination of her own self-doubt and guilt. She meticulously documented the times she stood by the phone, her hand hovering over the dial pad, moments away from confessing the truth and making everything easy again. She described the profound psychological battle between her maternal instinct to alleviate her child's suffering and her hard-won wisdom that understood suffering was a necessary prerequisite for genuine strength. To maintain her resolve, Sarah engaged in a deliberate practice of cinematic contrast, detailing her own small, quiet rituals in her modest home. The simple pleasure of watering her few potted plants, the comforting weight of a worn, borrowed library book, the focused simplicity of kneading dough for plain bread. She juxtaposed these tranquil, honest actions with the image of the $7 million sitting inertly in the bank vault, reflecting on how that money could instantly purchase a life devoid of these simple, grounded joys. The money, she concluded in her internal narrative, was dangerous because it promised escape from effort, and effort was the foundation of true character. The emotional peak of this period was the catastrophic phone call from Ria, hysterics, sobbing, claiming that the lack of funds was tearing her and Arjun apart, that he might leave her for the embarrassment of the small wedding. Sarah's internal response was a masterful display of controlled maternal agony. She saw the manipulation, the desperate attempt to leverage her guilt, yet she held firm, offering only gentle, non-financial support, forcing Ria to face the existential threat to her relationship without a monetary parachute. Slowly, imperceptibly, the narrative tension began to ease, replaced by the quiet, hopeful observation of change. Sarah documented the minute, incremental shifts in Ria and Arjun's behavior, the first green shoots of self-sufficiency. She described Arjun, the status-obsessed groom, learning to use a complex spreadsheet to hunt for discount vendors, a small act of humility that filled Sarah with profound, cautious optimism. She detailed how Ria, instead of demanding a designer veil, called her for advice on how to carefully stitch and mend a beautiful, vintage lace piece. This slow, agonizing process was the real purpose of the test. Sarah's internal monologue transformed from guilt into a quiet, profound sense of pride, seeing the character that her overprotection had suppressed finally beginning to emerge. This was the moment she knew the test was working. The challenge, the scarcity, was forcing them to cooperate, communicate, and build their dream on a foundation of shared labor rather than shared wealth. The relationship was strengthening, not because of what was acquired, but because of what had to be earned. The part concludes with Sarah physically helping with the preparations, not funding them, but contributing labor, mending the veil, kneading the traditional sweets, her hands finally working with her daughter, bonding over the shared effort of creation. The genuine, unprompted thanks Rhea offered. "Thank you for making us figure it out, Mom," was the only payment Sarah needed, confirming her difficult choice was the right one. The final segment of Sarah's story began with the powerful, cinematic flashback of the wedding day itself, recounted with painstaking sensory detail that focused entirely on the atmosphere, not the expense. She described the small, rented community hall, decorated not with imported flowers, but with hand-picked, locally sourced blossoms and meticulously arranged homemade details. She narrated the genuine warmth of the guests, the easy laughter, the lack of pretension, a true celebration of union rather than display. This simple, humble ceremony was, in Sarah's reflective view, the most extravagant wedding a mother could witness, because every single element of joy was rooted in effort, collaboration, and necessity. She focused on the physical appearance of the couple, their exhaustion from the planning replaced by a vibrant, visible pride, a kind of dignity that no hired planner could ever deliver. Sarah's internal monologue was a deep, sustained reflection on the authenticity of the moment. The climax of the flashback was the exchange of vows. Had the wedding been bankrolled by the $7 million, those vows would have been weighted by the money, potentially shallow and transactional. Here, watching them promise their lives to each other, Sarah felt a profound, satisfying certainty that their commitment was real, forged in the small, shared hardships of budgeting and negotiation. Her tears, streaming silently down her wrinkled cheeks, were not tears of sorrow for her late husband or for the money she didn't spend, but tears of pure, unadulterated relief and maternal triumph. The final, lingering hug with her daughter, Rhea whispering, "I wouldn't change a thing," served as the definitive validation of Sarah's great deception. Returning to the present day, the room now illuminated only by the soft glow of a flickering brass lamp, Sarah gently placed Liam's small hand on the precise spot over her heart. It was time for the profound confession. She revealed the exact figure, the distant location of the vault, and the total lack of withdrawal. Liam's reaction was drawn out in detail. First confusion, then wide-eyed shock, and finally, the inevitable, universal question, "But why? Why didn't you help them?" Sarah's response was a lengthy, philosophical dialogue that synthesized her entire life's experience. She used profound, extended analogies, comparing the money to a powerful engine given to a driver who has never learned to steer, or a book of wisdom handed to a student who has never learned to read. The true inheritance, she explained, was not the capital, but the character gained by the challenge. She meticulously outlined the specific behaviors she was protecting: Rhea's work ethic, Arjun's humility, and the couple's reliance on each other. The narrative concludes with Sarah instilling this profound secret into Liam, making him a co-conspirator in the legacy's protection. She explains that the $7 million is not gone. It is a sacred trust, a tool waiting patiently for the moment it can be wielded with wisdom and responsibility. She reminds Liam that his mother is currently flourishing, working hard, and building a life founded on earned success, a life infinitely more valuable than one founded on sudden, unearned wealth. Her final internal monologue is a powerful, resolute summary. The pain of her silence was the price of her daughter's strength. She stares into the quiet flame of the lamp, her eyes reflecting the light, radiant with the quiet, fierce victory of a mother who chose to be momentarily hated so that she could be truly respected. The money remains a secret, and the legacy of self-reliance is secure.